It's always a great privilege to welcome people to our conference and to welcome Canon John Spence, who's been with us this morning, Finance Chair of the Archbishop's Council. John, we're grateful you've come up this morning. We are so pleased to have you. John's going to be with us for the first session in a moment, a speech first, and then later on for the pre session with Emma as well. So we've got two bites for you this morning. John, thank you very much indeed for coming. Please do a warm welcome to John.
That was the microphone.
I think it was. I just plugged it.
Right, well, good morning everybody, it's lovely to be here. For those of you who don't know me, my name's John Spence. I was born and brought up in Edinburgh. Actually had my first 12 years in the United Free Church of Scotland, from which I'm still mentally scarred, before becoming an Episcopalian. I went to university in Trinity College, Dublin. I went to the Church of Ireland, a church which at that time was doomed because of the power of the Catholic Church in Ireland, which required that all Catholics marry fellow Catholics, or if they married anybody from outside that denomination, they'd be brought up as Catholics. And I actually was there in Trinity for Trinity was one of only two universities in the world from which you were excommunicated from the Catholic Church if you attended that university. And I was there when that ban was lifted in 1969, and we had the first Catholic Mass for 300 years. I only ever say this just to show that I'm just a lad that's moved around, really. I came back to England to work for Lloyds Bank, first in Wallasey in Cheshire, then in Newcastle, living in that lovely place called Wickham before coming down to London. And I was just a lad in the pews. I went on through my career and ended up as a managing director, retiring from Lloyds Bank in 2005. You always have to make that clear, 2005, before things went wrong. It was always fine when I left it. And it was great, actually. I had 32 years there, and in preparation for retirement, they sent you on a retirement course, and they sent us down to Eastbourne, which I always thought was quite fitting as the Zimmer capital of England. And if anyone's from Eastbourne here, well done, you've probably brought the average age down. It was great. This instructors told us all about the things we should do, hobbies we should develop, how we should rediscover our wives or partners, how we should spend our money and learn to save in retirement, or even actually dispose of assets. And even taught us about our funeral. Bankers, she said, when you die you should not be cremated but be buried. And what's more, she said, you should be buried at a depth of not of 6 feet but of 26 feet. And I was fascinated, and I went up to the instructors and I said, excuse me, I said, hello, excuse me, I said, how is it that bankers should not be cremated but be buried, and what's more, buried at a depth of 26 feet? Because, she said, deep down, bankers are very nice people. So let me start with, I know you're very, I do understand now, you're deep down, you're all very nice people as well, because you've given me a nice warm welcome. I'm going to start with 3 apologies. Firstly, to apologise that I was not with you last night and will be shooting off at lunchtime straight away. I had hoped to be staying longer. Some of you know my lovely, lovely daughter Catherine's been diagnosed with an aggressive brain tumour in the last 2 months, and it's just grim. So we've got to shoot off back down to Chelmsford. Secondly, to apologise to those of you who have heard me before or will hear me again, and if you are from the Diocese of Portsmouth or Canterbury, if you want to go off and visit the Rail Centre, I fully understand, because I'm coming to you next month. And thirdly, to apologise if some of what I say about the Renewal agenda is stuff you've heard before, but as I travel round the church, I am struck by just how varied the knowledge is of what this is, and incidentally, what it is not. So let's go back. How did this whole thing emerge? It emerged because firstly we acquired an Archbishop of Canterbury who was convinced in his own mind that he did not want any longer to be an Archbishop presiding, as had happened for 2 generations, over a church in gentle decline, but actually wanted one that was determined to change that trend. A trend which had seen our profile of churchgoers, which 30 years ago matched the whole population, move to being one which is on average 20 years older than the general population. A church which had seen the demise of a large generation, we call it now the lost generation, of children of parents of the 60s, if you like, and where we have lost great rafts in that range of peace. It was born of me quietly settling back, having been a church commissioner for 9 years, convinced that time to go and time to have a nice relaxed life, get tapped on the shoulder and people start trying to persuade me to do this role. Oh, John, he said, it'll only take a day or two a month. Who are they kidding anyway? And I managed to say no 3 times until I went to a certain dinner where the Dean of St Paul's wife, Hilary, started talking, not knowing anything about this. And I just say this in the echoes of what Emma was saying to you earlier about what are we called to do. And she started talking to me about lay vacation, and sometimes knowing that in your heart and your mind you have a role to play, and if you don't do it you will regret it. And so I allowed my name to go forward. And I went to see the Archbishop after they'd put me through the selection rigours and so on. And I said, I'll do this, I said, so long as we're prepared to be radical. And every time we meet now we have a conversation about who's being the more radical along the way. It was born not of any desire for some national strategy from Church House. I am no Church House groupie, and anyone who is here from Church House will know that I say that constantly. Church House is not there to be the power centre of the church. It is there to serve the church, and we need to create a culture which is about serving the wider church. The rubber hits the road at the parish, and the deanery becomes very important, becomes that point of coordination. But let's come back to that later. It was born out of 2 major things. So not just the Archbishop there, but firstly, we had completed a programme of research under the aegis of the Church Commissioners, which was published in January 14 under the heading From Anecdote to Evidence. And you may struggle over some precise bits of the research. I know some people question it, but the theme was overwhelming. We are a church that needs to change. We have an ageing issue. We have become better at nurturing the congregations we have than evangelising the communities that we serve. And there were various pieces of research brought together in that piece. And out of that, the second thread, that provoked us to send our officers out on a tour of dioceses. And they visited every diocese and sat with every bishop's staff team and listened to the diocese talk about what they want. And wonderfully, for the first time, there was a unanimity among dioceses that things had to change. That they had a thirst for growth, and we'll come back to what growth means in a second. Secondly, a recognition that they didn't have the strategies to do that. And that they, not in every case, but in many cases, needed help to develop the strategies which would become the powerhouse of the growth at diocesan level. And thirdly, that meant 2 things. Firstly, in their view, that they wanted to retain roughly the current population of ordained priests, whether stipendiary or not, but stipendiary have that full-timeness that some other parts of the ordained population don't always manage to provide. And secondly, that they needed to unlock the talents and skills of the lay people. Now, it is not an either-or. And one of the challenges we have with the Renewal programme is it is so often portrayed as one thing at the expense of the other. So the dioceses were clear. We think we need about the same number of ordained priests, but we also need to unlock the talents of the lay people. Indeed, that number of priests will only work if you do unlock those talents, because unless you have a greater amount of energy and vitality than has been present before, you will not get away from the nurturing. You will only do that. You will not re-evangelise. And from that came an arithmetical calculation that broadly we needed 50% more people coming through to ordination over the next decade than has been the case hitherto. That's simply because of the age profile of the existing priestly population, both because they are getting older, many are coming up to retirement, others who have worked wonderfully for the church for 30, 40 years, simply getting to the point, as many people do, where they need a rest. And so hence that is where one of the key objectives of the Renewal and Reform agenda comes from, the 50% growth in the pace of ordination. It is not instead of unlocking the talents of lay people. So that was the first piece that became articulated. The second was it was very clear that the Darlow formula, which had been the basis on which funds were distributed from the church commissioners through the Archbishop's Council to the diocese, had lost its relevance. In a declining church, it was opaque, it was complex, it rewarded failure. If, as a diocese, you managed to grow your church, your numbers of churchgoers, and therefore your parish giving, you sacrificed your Darlow subsidy. It rewarded the ability to keep sticking to old models of church and not experimenting with new. And so we began the task of creating the Resourcing the Future work stream, which has led General Synod in February and finally confirmed by the Church Commissioners in June, to this new means of distributing our funds, so about 50 million a year, which may sound a lot, but actually in church giving terms is not that much. The collection, the total of incomes you collect across the country are about 1.4 billion, so well done for all that. So 50 million at one level isn't a lot. However, it is 50 million of discretionary money, which we don't always have. And in future, from the 1st of January 17, that will go down two streams. Firstly, on a formula basis, according to the amount of less well-off or poorer communities that you have within the diocese, there will be a funding stream dedicated for work in those poorer communities. And the other 50%, about 24 million per annum, going for strategic development funding, where dioceses develop their strategies, and out of that bring forward their proactive bids for elements of funds that will help the growth of the church. And let's come back to that, because you have such a critical role, and it's just a very good moment for me just to pay tribute to all the work that goes on in deaneries. I just do admire you. I was never somebody who progressed to deanery. I was very happy to be the finance chair in my church and to work away in there, but I observed the people who gave so much time and commitment to working in that difficult role across parishes, across deaneries, where so often the churchmanship can vary a lot, and it can be quite challenging to find that commonality of Christ, and then to work through those churches which sometimes can feel as if they're not quite playing in the same park and willing to join up. So well done to all of you as representatives of the deaneries across the country. We had great debates about what growth means. There were sceptics who immediately said it cannot be a numbers game, and why would you want it to be? What's the point of just going for numbers if you're not creating disciples? And we recruited Adrian Newman, the Bishop of Stepney, to be our challenger in this, and he really put us through rigour. And we developed a vision of strong, good growth, a growth which is seen not alone in the leafy suburbs of the southeast, but in all parts of the country, in those end-of-line towns where it's so hard to get even GPs to go to, and where social care needs are among the greatest. In those communities, in those big estates, actually, so often the big estates that came out in great numbers to vote in the recent referendum, and demonstrating again their lack of engagement with where they think, quotes, the establishment, close quotes, is going. And growth in the depth of our discipleship. The things Emma was talking about, through contact and nurture to commitment and growth, that personal growth. And I may say there's a later strand that this produced of the Renewal agenda, because we've had work streams growing all the time. We already had the evangelism one you've heard about from Emma. There was the discipleship one alongside that. But now, in the last year, we created the leadership work stream. How do we unlock the talents of the laity? And Matthew Frost, ex-chief executive of the Tier Fund, who's come on to Archbishop's Council, was recruited particularly to lead that. And there is a profound report now in the final draft stage, which is going to be such an exciting document for the church to debate as to how you do that, how you change cultures in ways which respect all the gifts of those who go through training to ordination, while rooting those people in the laity in a theological way that can empower them through the things they do every day of the week to evangelize the communities in which they live, work and play. So you'll see how this thing has grown like topsy. We started with the disciple and evangelism. We had the resourcing the future, recognising that we had to change the way in which central funds were distributed. We then had the resourcing ministerial education and effectiveness, RME, which is all about how do you stimulate the growth and the rate of vocations to bring 50% through. How do you make the training and development most relevant to the needs of today, which for some will continue to be the residential training and theological educational institutes, who have been much worried by this but don't need to be, because if we get the 50% more, even if far more go through vocational and mixed mode development, there will still need to be those who we absolutely want to go through the residential space, particularly those who are younger. One thing that had happened, as you may know, is that the numbers coming through to ordination a decade ago were somewhat skewed towards the older generations. That's great. It's absolutely wonderful to have people of 45, 50 coming through to ordination. We want that to continue, of course we do, but they are not always going to be the people who are best abled to work with the younger people that we want to bring in to replace that lost generation. So we've invested in growing the capacity of CEMES, the Church of England Ministerial Experience Scheme, which is aimed at younger people and which typically has a 40 to 50% conversion rate to ordination. We're working hard to think about how do we penetrate younger women into ordination, black and minority ethnic groups into ordination, areas where we're very underrepresented. The diocesan bishops have done great work in looking through and just working out, do their directors of ordination have the right talents, the right competencies to help recognise what we need for the future? Yes, the nurturers, but also alongside them the game changers. Another thing that came out of the anecdote to evidence piece, which can be misinterpreted, is they said you need more game changers, more people who are brilliant at unlocking the commitment of volunteers around them, at developing large teams, who really are focused not just within the church walls but out in their communities. Not at the expense of the nurturers, it's just you're short of the game changers. And so the diocese now are working hard, and in some cases appointing extra directors, extra capacity into the system. And I'm nervous about saying this to you, that there are just the very first signs that in 2017 we may start to see a very significant upward trend in the number of people coming through BAPS to start an ordination development. There are just, from work we've done this summer, there are indications that substantially larger numbers of people are coming into consideration, which will be terrific. So you've got the vocations piece of ministerial education, you've got the pathways through the TEIs and other means. There's a very major funding piece. If we do manage to do this, we have very, very significant issues of funding, and I may once again have to tread to the Church Commissioners, as I've done this year, where I unlocked 73 million to help with the new Resourcing the Future model. We may need to go back there again, but that can only happen when I've got the cause to do it. And from it, then, will come the extra challenge of how will you cope if you have far more ordinands coming through with good positions for them to be curates. Both the mentors who can help them in curacy and the places they can go. And I know that at least one diocese is thinking about very different models of mentoring curates in future in preparation for those numbers. So that's all the ministerial, the ministerial work streams. So there are 4 of them. those, and then you get on to the, I've talked about RTF, I've talked about evangelism, I've talked about lay leadership. Lay ministry is the bit that gets sort of stuck in the middle of this. Where do you start taking the debate about what lay ministers can do? How do you ensure that you leave with ordained priests that which they are best equipped to do? How do you free them up? And we have some dioceses talking about lay incumbents, or indeed trialling lay incumbents, in order that priests can do. And actually, what is it that we want these ordained priests, of whom we want to maintain the same number? What is it we really want them to be doing alongside all the things that lay ministers, lay leaders and lay disciples will do? And the more we look at it, the more we understand the power of education. 600,000 children in Church of England primary schools, 200 in Catholic and secondary schools. The government announces that they want 500 new free schools to be created by 2020, and our education board have set the challenge of the target on themselves of getting 125. And if we can do that, it will be terrific. And if we can get more of them as secondary schools, that will be better still. But what are we doing with these youngsters as they come out of church schools? And how do we engage with them? And it takes you right into the digital space. And I know there's great work going on in some dioceses like Lichfield about digital evangelism. We need to replicate that and work with you, pulling on the best practice that exists in the church and dioceses and parishes outside the church. Some of the free churches are doing a lot more in this space than we are. Every child who leaves a Church of England primary school today will, not every child, almost every child will have a mobile phone, will be using social media. Why would we not want to maintain our relationship with them when they do so? In order that as they go through teenagehood, if they're not even going to a church school, they are still confident in Christ. One of the key goals of the education strategy now. Children confident in Christ, confident in themselves. And of course those other generations from 18 upwards through 30 who just live in social media in a way that we don't, who will sit at the dinner table, even in restaurants, you'll have seen them, on multimedia at the same time, having dialogue and conversations. And we need to move into those conversations with virtual priests and so on. So the digital evangelism work stream has been granted £2 million over 3 years. We're recruiting the competencies to be required now, creating an expert reference group to help us, because we acknowledge we don't have the skills within the church to really take us through this place. And then the final work stream is about what we now call working together, which is about the reform of the culture within Church House to be ready to serve the needs of a growing church. And I do applaud the work that the chief executives of the church commissioners, the pensions board and the Archbishop's Council have done to start breaking down the silos which exist there, and that sense that head office knows best. You know best. It will always be the case that there are more ideas and answers to the challenges I pose here than I can bring forward myself, or even that wonderful body known as the Archbishop's Council or General Synod can convey. You will know what will work in your areas. So if that sums up for you what the renewal and reform agenda is, let's move on in a moment to the role that you will play. But my vision here, the vision is that over time we start to turn the church around. And how will you evidence that? By the way, I think many of you know I'm blind. I became blind in 1990. I've no great regrets about this. It's a price well worth paying to ensure that Yvonne and I never have an argument about who drives home after a party. Unless I'm really pissed. It's very good. I actually worried Carla that happened this morning, welcomed me and said, I'm sorry, I've only got water, the bar's not open yet. And I thought, gosh, is that your reputation really? No, not even 10:30. No, not even me, Carla. That'll be fine. And you meet some fascinating people. I joined the Chelmsford Blind Club, where I met a man who's not only blind and half deaf and who's a parachutist, and I went up to him and said, "Hey Jim," or rather I shouted, "Hey Jim," I shouted, "how is it you can be blind, half deaf and be a parachutist?" And he said, "John, it's really quite simple. I stand in my house and my friends come for me in their car. They take me out of the house, they take me down the garden path, they put me in the car, they strap me in, and the car starts, and I know when the car has started because it begins to vibrate. They take me to the airport and they pull me out of the car and they lead me across the runway, and we reach the plane, and I know when we've reached the plane because I dent the side of it with my knee. They put me in the plane, they strap me in, it goes down the runway, it takes off and it climbs to 10,000 feet. And I know when it's reached 10,000 feet because they open the hatch and the air goes whoosh. And they put one thumb there and tell me it is my parachute. And they put one thumb there and tell me it is my emergency parachute. And they throw me out of the plane. And I count to 10 slowly. 1, 2, 3, up to 10 I count, and I pull my thumb there, and the parachute opens and I float so safely down to the ground. And if nothing happens, I pull my thumb there, the emergency parachute opens again, I float so safely down to the ground, and it really is the most wonderful feeling. Jim, I shouted, that is truly remarkable. But surely, I said, the most difficult part. How on earth can you tell when you're nearing the land? Johnny said, that's not the most difficult part. That's the easiest. That's when the lead on the guide dog goes slack. There comes a point in these things, you know, where you think, will I carry on with Renewal and Reform, or will I just tell a couple more jokes? Yes, thanks very much. So I was talking to my friend David Campbell, who's quite a lad who quite often drives me around these places, and he has been developing a habit of driving under the influence. I've told him he's really got to stop it. He phoned me up the other day, and he said, "John, I had a really heavy night last night. We were down in Chelmsford. We'd had a few drinks. We ended up on the tequila and the slammers and everything." I said, "David," I said, "I hope you've learnt your lesson. I trust you left your car in town." "Yes, John," he said. I did actually. I left the car, I took the bus home, and I was fine." And I said, "Why'd you sound so surprised?" He said, "Because I'd never driven a bus before." So you don't need eyesight to have vision. So the vision of the Renewal agenda, in my words, but only my words because it's your programme, not mine, are firstly that we continue to nurture those congregations and help them as they struggle with the fact of major buildings, grade 1 listed buildings, groups of people who are a community in themselves and who actually want to stay that way. Secondly, that sitting alongside that we see the development of new communities, sometimes those existing communities finding new ways to reach out into their communities, but where Christians in the Church of England no longer hide it, but wear it in the things we do and the things we say, that we are living disciples. Thirdly, that we see new communities growing. I hear you had a church plant from Islington here last night. Rick is doing a wonderful job, isn't he, really? He can't do that on his own. And it's brilliant to hear more and more examples of new living communities of Christians coming together and creating new churches. And we've learned so much from the work we did in new housing developments in recent years. The first thing you don't do is build a church. You create your living, worshipping, disciple community. And from that, you just see where things go after that. And fourthly, that more and more across the country, that while our overall numbers will continue to be challenged just because of the age profile of the people that we have, we will see more and more of younger generations engaging with the church, both coming there, of course, but remember that contact, nurture, commitment, growth piece from Emma, actually engaged with us digitally long before they start coming through our doors. But they'll get there. And what's your role? Well, I'd like to suggest 4 things. A couple easy, a couple harder. The easy one, firstly, is to be key conduits for communication to help this mutual understanding. We continue to produce materials, blogs, video nets and so on. There's an ongoing programme of these bits of material coming out from Church House which only get as much airtime as you allow them to have. If you go onto the Renewal and Reform website, you will be able to access these, but you will understand, and I know this having been a Diocesan Board of Finance chair, communications go out to busy vicars and incumbents or PCC secretaries and treasurers, and sometimes they just get lost because there is so much else coming out. The role that deaneries can play in being forums where you can maybe play some of those materials as a group and discuss them and think what they mean in your locality will be of great help. Secondly, I'd encourage you to be flexible. We're going up the challenge ladder now. In my own diocese, our bishops developed a very good strategy, and I helped him with it, and I observed as I went around into consultation events that quite people said, this is a good strategy, but we don't need to do it here, do we? It's not for us, is it? It is for you. And the issue is not about how you close your minds to these things that are developing. And bear in mind, the key of this, which I'll come back to, is the creation of 40 strong diocesan strategies. It is about how you flex it in your area and work constructively to create the model that will work across the areas and communities you serve. And thirdly, is to own it and to be the creators of the futures yourself. And I knew I'd left one work stream out, which was very naughty of me. It's Pete Broadbent is leading the simplification work stream. We are doing quite a lot to rid the church. Do you realise that every single church rule is underwritten by state law because of our established church nature? It is absolutely crippling our ability to make change quickly. In Parliament, they now have enabling legislation in place which says there are some things that you have to go to Parliament to agree. There are other things that can be agreed by order and thus be dealt with quicker. Still held to scrutiny by other MPs, but they can be done more quickly. So the enabling piece of legislation is now has now begun its route through Synod to help free up so that Synod can debate the things that matter, not spend endless times debating, as they have done in the last 5 years, things like the titles of dioceses or the clothing that clergy may wear on certain occasions when half the clergy ignore the rules. Anyway, it's a bit pointless really. So actually you think what it feels to you would be the things to change, and the simplification work stream are very happy to hear from people. And there is the question, how radical do you want to be? What should the church presence be going forward in what we call a parish today? And it doesn't need to mean that you change everything, but would you want to try some different models of church in particular communities? Are your deaneries today covering the right communities as opposed to the historic basis on which they were formed? Could your deaneries be reshaped to get better results? Are there other key things within the church's rules? I heard Emma say, what are the things that are holding you back? What are the things that are holding you back in your community from achieving that growth, that commitment, that nurturing, that evangelism? And please tell us, because as I've said several times, you are the people who know the answers better than us. And finally, my challenge of where the deaneries can really have a role to play, and this may be the most difficult of all. Central to the whole success of this wonderful movement, this Renewal and Reform movement, which I'm privileged to serve, is the fact that we are there to enable, empower and facilitate the diocese, working with their deaneries and parishes, in bold strategies that will enable the church to grow and bring Christ back to the centre of this country, its culture and its conscience. And in that space, that means that dioceses have got to create good engine rooms for developing those strategies. And I have to share with you that there are real challenges here, where bishops' councils are too often collections of people who come thinking their job is to represent their patch, their bit of the church, their deanery, rather than to take that step up into the collegiate responsibility of creating and implementing that diocesan strategy. Who are jealous of their role and their power and their title and their status. And sometimes it will only be you that can say to your bishop and their staff, we need different competencies. We need to recruit a group of people who can sit right alongside Bishop's Council, but who can develop this strategy for us, and we can then consider it when it's brought back here. To whom you delegate certain things for them to do to help you get the strategy you require. Because you have lifted yourself from your role as deanery representative into part of the body of Christ at diocesan level, and indeed through that at national level, taking the thinking into a plane it will never otherwise reach. 4 roles for you. Communications, flexing, creating, and developing the strategy. And I just would want to thank you for the privilege of letting me come here this morning. I'll be very happy to answer your questions. And why not, let's finish by remembering the story of Cinderella. It was 50 years since Cinderella had been on the world stage, famed for her meeting with Prince Charming, the wonderful event of the lost slipper, the subsequent marriage, and the fairy tale romance. But now, frankly, Cinderella was a rather poor sight. She was sitting dishevelled, her hair unkempt, her clothes worn, on a chair that once might have been golden, but from which the gold paint was now peeling off it. She only had a black cat lying in the hearth to keep her company. Suddenly there was a flash, and up in front of her came her fairy godmother. Cinderella, she said, this is 50 years since I saw you. You have been a very good woman through your life. Now is the time for you to reap your reward. I will give you 3 wishes. What is your first wish? Well, said Cinderella when she'd recovered from her surprise, do you know, it was wonderful when I was young and glamorous, a beautiful young lady. It would be lovely if I could look young once more. There was a flash, and the aged Cinderella disappeared and was replaced by a beautiful young lady in a lovely dress with a very trim and petite body. Better not go any further in case Donald Trump gets any ideas. Have your second wish, said Cinderella. Well, said the fairy godmother. Well, said Cinderella, you know, I had a very happy life with Prince Charming, but he didn't manage our finances well. He invested his pension with Equitable Life. I've been left with virtually no money at all. How nice it would be if I had money once more. There was a flash. The chair disappeared and was replaced by a golden throne. There were some nice fittings round the bedroom in which she sat, and on her lap was a pile of golden sovereigns. She was rich once more. Your third and final wish, said Cinderella. Said the fairy godmother. I'm getting carried away. Said the fairy godmother. Well, said Cinderella, look, I'm now looking young again. I've now got wealth. Prince Charming and I had a wonderful life. We were faithful to each other, but he's been dead for 10 years. Wouldn't it be lovely just in my final years if there was a nice young man in my life once more? There was a flash. The black cat disappeared and was replaced by an Adonis. No, it wasn't Tug. By a young man with golden curls that slid down the nape of his neck, a firm chest with slight signs of hair peeping above his t-shirt, strong biceps and muscles, a very flat stomach with penetrating blue eyes that gazed unblinkingly towards Cinderella. his high cheekbones, his flared nostrils, his firm lips, his eyes latched into hers. Unblinking, he walked towards her. He lifted her from the chair. The sovereign slid quietly to the floor. He held her in his arms. He lowered his face to her face. His cheek slid along her cheek. She could feel the gentle stubble of him. And his lips whispered into her ear, "I bet you wish now that you hadn't had me neutered." Ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing neutered about the Church of England. We may have gone through a period of ageing, but the latent energy and talent that within us just needs to be unswept, not by a fairy godmother, but by you and me and every one of us, recognising again that we are as young, as vibrant as we want to be, that our country needs us, and that we are capable of bringing Christ back into their hearts.
One of the moments when you say, "What can I say to that, John?" Well, thank you. Apart from a huge debt of thanks for a superb speech this morning. We were going to have questions and answers, but it is now 11:15.
We've gone on too long, sorry.
No, you haven't. No, that's fine. That's absolutely fine, because there will be time for questions and answers in the next session. So I'm going to suggest, if we may, that we now go for coffee. The coffee will be served down in the terrace room, around by the bar area, and then we're back here. If we could be back here for 11:45 for our final session with Emma and John, and Bishop Peter will lead us through that. So thank you very much, John. It's been a super morning. Thank you very much.